Thank you for listening to this podcast from TRE, Talk Radio Europe, your voice in Spain and around the world. For more information, please visit tre.radio.
The book show on TRE is sponsored by CK La Quinta, a residency care home for the elderly like no other in Marbella. Find out more at cklaquinta.com.
The Book Show, presented by Hannah Murray.
Good afternoon. Welcome to this week's book show. We start by looking at the bestseller lists on amazon.co.uk and the Sunday Times, the oldest and most influential book sales chart in the UK, and seeing what new entries there are. We'll be chatting to Garrett Curbow, the author of the Daughter of Light trilogy, which was shortlisted for the Publishers Weekly Selfies Award. His latest book, Whispers of Ink and Starlight, is a magical and genre-bending novel that will pull you in and keep you hooked until the last page. It's a spellbinding tale of forbidden love and the power of words, where a girl must choose between the life written for her and the future she dares to imagine. We're also chatting to James Cahill, who has worked in the art world and academia for the past 15 years. His latest book, The Violet Hour, is a richly layered novel about desire, deception, grief, power and money, set in the world of modern art. And we're joined by Katy Dixon, who studied history at Cambridge before returning to her home city of Liverpool to pursue a career in financial services. Her debut novel, Enough, is northern grit that meets psychological suspense. It's a whatdunnit and a whydunnit rather than a whodunnit. And that's just the first hour. In the second hour, we're chatting to Lauren C. Johnson, Ian Saraja and Nicole Leang.
The Book Show, presented by Hannah Murray.
Welcome to The Book Show. We start by looking at the Sunday Times bestseller list, the oldest and most influential book sales chart in the UK. This is the one that every author wants to be on, as it's the most accurate estimation of book sales in the country. As the film adaptation starring Ryan Gosling hit cinemas, Andy Weir's 2021 sci-fi novel Project Hail Mary jumps to number 2 in paperback fiction. Meanwhile, in hardback non-fiction, Alan Bennett's latest collection of stories and prose debuts at number 1, Enough Said, which chronicles old age, insecurity and political absurdity. It's his 6th title to make the charts. So let's have a look at them. General hardbacks, there are 3 new entries, including that number 1 position, Enough Said by Alan Bennett, a collection of diaries and prose, both personal and political, covering 2016 to 2024. Number 2 is Bloody Dangerous by Colin Bell. Number 3, a new entry by Donna Ashworth called Loss, nearly 150 poems to bring understanding and comfort to those navigating grief. Number 4, Rasputin by Anthony Beaver. Number 5 is the other new entry called British Gardens by Monty Don, what Britain's gardens, parks and other landscapes tell us about the nation. Number 6 is Always Remember by Charlie Mackesy. Number 7, Love Needs No Words by James Hunt. Number 8, To the Women by Donna Ashworth. Number 9 is My Gardening Life by Mary Berry. And number 10, A Hymn to Life by Giselle Pellicott. Fiction hardbacks, there are 5 new entries this week, including number 1, The Book of Fallen Leaves by A.S. Tamaki. An exiled prince and the peasant who saved his life fight for their clan and shared future. A new entry at 2 called Inamorata by Ava Reid. Agnes must restore her family's legacy and magic through her cousin's betrothal. Number 3, The Family Friend by Claire Douglas. Number 4 this week is Essex Wives by Kimberly Chambers. Number 5 is The Correspondent by Virginia Evans. Number 6, Sweet is a new entry, Sweet Bitter Song by Rosie Hewlett. In ancient Ithaca, the servant Melantho and Princess Penelope are drawn together. A new entry at 7 called Look What You Made Me Do by John Lanchester. A wife notices details and intimacies from her own marriage on a hit TV show. Number 8 is the final new entry called Sisters in Yellow by Mieko Kawakami. A poor Tokyo teenager's life is transformed by the arrival of an older woman. Number 9 is The Night Prince by Lauren Palfreyman. And number 10, Judge Stone by James Patterson and Viola Davis. Looking at Amazon.co.uk, the top 10 bestsellers for this week are mostly children's Easter books, but I'll run through them anyway. Number 1 is Fluffy Chick, an Easter touch and feel book by Rod Campbell. Number 2, The Dinosaur That Pooped Easter by Tom Fletcher and Dougie Pointer. Number 3, Paddington's Easter Egg Hunt by Michael Bond. Number 4, There's a Bunny in Your Book. That's book 11 in the Who's in Your Book series by Tom Fletcher. Number 5, Where's Stitch? Limited Easter Edition by Walt Disney. Number 6 is The Names by Florence Knapp. I think that's the one of 2 non-Easter books in the top 10 this week. Number 7 is Tales from Acorn Wood by Julia Donaldson. Number 8, Sticker Dolly Dressing Easter Party by Fiona Watt. Number 9, the other non-Easter book, Suicide of a Nation, Immigration, Islam, Identity by Matt Goodwin. And number 10, The Easter Egg Hunt, Stories from Percy's Park by Nick Butterworth.
The Book Programme, presented by Hannah Murray.
You're listening to Hannah Murray on The Book Show.
Joining us on the line now is Garrett Curbow. He's the author of the Daughter of Light trilogy, which was shortlisted for the Publishers Weekly Selfies Award. He's with us on the Book Show to talk about his latest novel, Whispers of Ink and Starlight. It's a magical and genre-bending novel that will pull you in and keep you hooked until the last page. It's a spellbinding tale of forbidden love and the power of words, where a girl must choose between the life written for her and the future she dares to imagine. Welcome to the Book Show, Garrett.
Thank you so much for having me here.
It's a pleasure. It's great to have you with us on the show. I was reading an interview that you did saying that you've literally been writing since you were 6 or 7.
Yeah, a long time. I realized that I liked it pretty early on, and then I got addicted. I was just like, this is fun. This is how I want to spend my time.
Oh, nice. And have you always written kind of similar books? Because you finished your first novel at 14, and that was Daughter of Light.
Yes. So Daughter of Light went through many revisions after that, but I did start writing fantasy. I started falling in love with reading because of fantasy. So naturally, I started writing fantasy first and didn't really start writing anything more realistic until I got to college.
Yeah. So how would you say your writing has kind of grown and developed since then?
It's interesting because after writing the Daughter of Light trilogy, I kind of don't want to write like high fantasy anymore, at least not for the time being, or at least in the near future. It's just a big commitment to world build and to create a whole new universe and world and try to map out a whole fantasy series. I really enjoy writing grounded, realistic stories that have slightly magical elements, stories that take place in our world. So that's where I'm at right now.
Yeah. So tell us a little bit about the background of Whispers and Ink and Starlight, because you started writing when you were at college. Did you? Was it inspired by your time at college?
Yeah. So my first year of college, I started writing Whispers of Ink and Starlight. And I wouldn't say necessarily the book itself was inspired by my time at college, because I, unlike James, actually really enjoyed my college experience. I did major in English with a concentration in creative writing, so I didn't have anything to not enjoy. So it was 2020. That's why I forgot, because I block it out of my head anytime that I remember 2020 and COVID and all of that.
Yes, it was a horrendous time.
Yes, it was awful. But so I started college in 2020, and it was, all the classes were virtual. Everything was social distancing. You had to like stay in your dorm room, and you weren't supposed to go to other people's dorm rooms. And it was just not what the typical college experience is like, at least in the beginning. And so I had a lot of time to write. I wasn't really going out. I wasn't doing things. So that first year of college, I wrote a lot, and I wrote the entire first draft of the book. Yeah. And I was heavily inspired by 2 pieces of media that I consumed that year, that came out that year. The first one was Folklore by Taylor Swift, and the album. And the second one was the book, The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue by V.E. Schwab.
Okay. And what inspired you about both of those things?
So with Folklore, it was really the tone of the album. It was, she was writing in a very lyrical and poetic way, but about very contemporary things and in a very contemporary setting. And it just had a darker, but also whimsical tone to it. And I just loved that she combined those things, like very pretty writing and pretty music, but darker themes. And then The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue, I just was so inspired by both the writing style. I love V.E. Schwab's writing style, and also just the genre bending nature of the book. Like it doesn't necessarily fit into any one box. It's kind of a romance. It's kind of a piece of literary fiction. It does have a heavy magical realism element to it. It also is historical fiction, but it also takes place in present day. And I just loved how it didn't fit into any one trope or genre box.
Yeah. So tell us about the setting of this novel, because there's a couple of places that you set the book and hadn't initially visited, but have done since, and absolutely love it.
Yes. So when I started writing the book, I've always been interested in travel. I've always wanted to go to more places outside of the US. And it just felt natural when I was writing the book. I didn't have a really strict plan when I was first writing it. And after Nell and James go to New York City, they do leave the US, and they first go to Paris, and then they go to Scotland. And both of these places were places that I had always wanted to visit. I did end up, the year after I wrote the first draft, going to Scotland and staying there for 2 weeks. And it was phenomenal. It was incredible. I've always wanted to go there. And it was just everything that I could have imagined. It was so beautiful. The people were so kind. And I stayed most of the time in Edinburgh, which was really nice. But we did travel around a little bit. We went to Inverness and went up into the Highlands. And I got so much inspiration for the revisions for Whispers of Ink and Starlight from that trip. Now, James and Nell do go to Paris, and I have never been to France. I still have never been to France, and I would love to go. So I just did the best research I could do for those chapters.
Yeah, next on the list. But you've really fallen in love with New York, haven't you?
Yes. So I also had not been to New York whenever I first wrote the book. I've been a handful of times since then, and I will go back as many times as I can.
So tell us about your 2 main characters.
Yeah, so James he starts the book out as a depressed college student. He's majoring in biology. He's a pre-med major, and he does not want to be a doctor. He does not want to go down that route. He is miserable in school. He's fine at it. Like, he's not doing poorly at school. He just hates it. He hates his classes. He hates putting in the effort for something that feels like a dead end to him. And what he really wants to do is write. So it's the summer. He's between semesters at college. He's living with his parents. And on the 4th of July, he meets this woman named Nell, who he's never seen before, in Lincoln, the small town where he was born and raised. And that's kind of where he starts out at the book. And he goes on a huge character arc throughout the novel, and of course changes a lot. And Nell, the woman who he meets, is around the same age. She's also 21, and she was also born and raised in Lincoln, but she has never left her house. At least, or maybe only a couple of times she's left her house. She's more of a mysterious character in the beginning. She is where a lot of the magical realism elements come into the story. I don't know how much I should say about her character. I know that is in the synopsis, but I don't want to give anything away on accident, anything extra. But just know that she is not necessarily what she says she is, and she's not who she says she is.
Yeah. And was it one or the other characters that came to you first, or was it more about the story? Where did the idea sort of come from?
The root of the story was the relationship. So whenever I first came up with the idea of the book, the first scene that I wrote for the book was a chapter that got deleted, but it was at the end of the book, and it was very focused on the relationship and where the relationship ends at the end of the book.
Why did it get deleted?
Well, it just didn't fit in with the story anymore, so I had to take it out.
Okay. And is that difficult to do when you're writing? Obviously, editing is a massive part of writing. Is it sometimes difficult? Do you get attached to chapters?
I do. So I actually find it a lot easier to delete a whole chapter, because if I'm at the point where I feel like an entire chapter needs to be deleted for whatever reason, I'm kind of just like, okay, this is to better service the story, and I can clearly see that. I get more attached to like individual lines that maybe I feel a little repetitive, or this metaphor has been used too many times, or you've used the word eyes too many times, and then I have to change or delete individual lines. And that sometimes is a little bit hard because I find myself clinging on to those.
And have you already started the next book? I understand you're moving on to something a bit different for the next book.
Yeah. So my next book is it does lean a little more into the fantasy genre, but it still takes place on Earth today. It's still like a contemporary fantasy, but I have started working on it. I have a finished draft, and I'm working on my next draft now. It does not have a title, but it's somewhat inspired by Buffy the Vampire Slayer and the movie A Star is Born.
Okay.
It's about, right? It's about a demon slayer, and she's 23. She's been doing it since she was 14. And she really does not want to do it anymore. She feels very claustrophobic in the job. The fate of the world essentially rests on her shoulders, and she's being forced to stay there by this group of people. But what she really wants to do is be a musician and be a singer-songwriter and pursue that as a career. So she meets a man who is also wanting to be a singer-songwriter, and they start writing songs together, and they get a record deal. And so she has the opportunity to leave and chase her dreams, but she would be abandoning defending the world by doing that.
Love it. So it sounds like another genre-crossing novel.
Yeah, kind of.
Brilliant. And where does the title come from for this one, Whispers of Ink and Starlight?
It just comes from how much I love each of the individual words and how they, to me, really capture the tone of the book. So I feel like it's a quiet, somewhat mysterious, soft book. And the word whispers, for me, really ties in to that aspect of the novel, but also it just helps to wrap in the rest of the title. So ink, I feel like, just had to be there. It's the biggest catalyst of the entire book. It drives the magical realism, and it drives the entire plot. And so I was playing around with what should come after that, because Whispers of Ink doesn't really hit on its own, in my opinion. So Starlight is a pretty word. I feel like I like the writing of this book because I feel like I was leaning a little more on like a lyrical, pretty kind of writing. At least that's what I was going for. And as I was reading back through the book and my edits, I found so many references to Starlight and to making wishes on stars and describing the night sky. And I hadn't really consciously realized that I had done that so many times. There's one scene where Nell and James literally are looking up at the night sky and talking about which stars they can wish on. And if they don't even have to wish on a star, they can wish on the moon. And so as I was reading back through Whispers of Ink and Starlight, it just captured the book in the perfect way.
Yeah, nice. It also could be a Taylor Swift song as well, to be fair.
True.
I can see her singing it.
No, I see that. I really do.
Well, if people want to get a copy of Whispers of Ink and Starlight, it's out now. It's available on our website, tre.radio, and it's by Garrett Curbow, who we've been chatting with. Garrett, thanks so much for joining us.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Talk Radio Europe. Talk Radio Europe.
The Book Show on TRE is sponsored by CK La Quinta, a residency care home for the elderly like no other in Marbella. Find out more at cklaquinta.com.
The Book Show with Hannah Murray.
Joining us on the line now is James Cahill. He's worked in the art world and academia for the past 15 years and divides his time between London and Los Angeles. He's with us on the Book Show to talk about his latest book, The Violet Hour, which is a richly layered novel about desire, deception, grief, power and money set in the world of modern art. Welcome to the Book Show, James.
Thanks, Hannah. Great to be here.
Oh, great to have you with us. So tell us about the work that you do in the art world, or the work that you have done.
Well, my work in the art world is pretty varied, or it has been over the last 15 years or so, which I suppose is why the novel has so much going on in it, because in a way it reflects my quite broad and ranging experience in that whole world. I mean, as you mentioned, I have a background in academia, so I've spent a long time in different British universities researching art history and related things. But then for a long time, I worked in a gallery, a leading contemporary gallery in London, working with artists, working on exhibitions. And that was a fascinating, very informative experience, which really forms the basis for my novel, The Violet Hour, which is all about that fast-paced, glittering, high-end world of contemporary art. That's very much the setting of this story and draws upon that background of mine. Although I should point out that the individuals in the story are very much fictional. They're my own creations, my own inventions.
And what about the setting in the book? Is it mainly based in New York?
It's based largely in New York, but it moves all over the place. So some of the settings, some of the scenes are in London. In fact, the story begins very specifically on a summer's evening at the Violet Hour in London, and everything is completely still. I wanted it to feel cinematic. And then suddenly, out of nowhere, you see this young man appear on a balcony and fall to his death. And that marks the very beginning of the story. And then as we move all around the world to New York and Lake Geneva, Hong Kong at one point, you're gradually going to learn how this tragic, unexpected event at the beginning is interthreaded with the lives of the three main characters. But yes, it certainly is international in its setting, in the way it moves around. But New York is probably, of all of the places it's set, the main one.
Okay. And it makes a story exciting, I think, moving it from place to place. The different settings that you've chosen, are they all places that you know well? I mean, did you choose them for a reason?
Well, London and New York are the sort of the twin centres of the art world or the art scene, particularly contemporary art. So it was important that the story took place in both of those. I've been to most of the places that are depicted in the story. I don't know them all as well as each other. My main character, or one of the three main characters, is a renowned global abstract painter called Thomas Haller, who at the beginning of the story has mysteriously retreated from the art scene. He's left New York to go and live on the shore of Lake Geneva in Switzerland, near the town of Montreux, which for him is a kind of complete hinterland. He's run away from everything he knew, and we'll come to understand why he's done that. But I've never actually been to Montreux in Switzerland, so I did have to do a bit of work looking at Google Street View and Google Images and figuring out what this affluent, tranquil Swiss town might be like.
Yeah. And tell us about the other two characters, the other two main characters.
Well, aside from Thomas, you have Lorna Bedford, who is an arts dealer in her 40s. She's British, but she's lived in New York for many years, running a contemporary art gallery. And she is Thomas's oldest friend. They've been friends since they were art students together in London in the 1990s. And for a long time, she was his art dealer. But he has lately abandoned her for a bigger, glitzier dealer, which is not an unusual thing, I suppose, in contemporary art. But in the novel, you're going to learn why this has happened as you gain more of a window into Thomas and Lorna's shared past. The third main character is Leo Goffman, who is a real estate tycoon in his 80s, and he lives in New York at the top of one of these pencil-thin, sky-high towers that you now have on the south side of Central Park. And he is an art collector, a really voracious art collector. He spends his days in sort of melancholic isolation, surrounded by these extraordinary things he's bought, but really brooding about his life as well and his own loneliness. He's a complex character, to say the least.
Yeah. And is it fun coming up with the characters? Do you enjoy the creation of the characters or the story more, would you say?
It's really both, Hannah. It's hard to disentangle them, actually, because I would say that the characters are there from the very beginning in my mind, and then they sort of build and develop and they acquire layers as I think more about them and their pasts and their personalities and what sort of people they are. But the story then kind of grows up organically at the same time as I think about what could have happened to these characters, or in the case of someone like Leo, what could have made him the sort of man he's become, this, not altogether pleasant man, this grasping, egocentric, selfish, but extremely successful character who, what makes a man like that? These are the sorts of questions that are in my mind, and those dictate both character and plot. And I guess it's fair to say that the story of The Violet Hour is quite intricate. I wanted it to feel a little bit like a thriller or a murder mystery. As I pointed out, you have this strange death at the beginning, and it takes a long time for a reader to appreciate, I think, how that is relevant to the lives of all of the characters. But yes, the plot certainly does have a complexity to it that was deliberate.
Yeah. And you mentioned that the violet hour is like a moment in the sky right at the beginning of the book. Did you come up with that first and the title and go from there, or did you put that in at the end, wondering what you were going to call it?
It came along during the writing. It certainly wasn't there at the beginning. I have various working titles in my mind as I go along, but it suddenly made sense. I knew the phrase from T.S. Eliot's poem, The Wasteland, where that phrase gets used. And of course, it has this kind of soaring, epic beauty about it, describing the twilight hour. Although in T.S. Eliot, it actually is somewhat ironic because you have this beautiful, epic description, and then the scene that follows is really dismally real and rather unpleasant. And I guess I wanted in the novel to create those sorts of shifts between something soaringly beautiful and something much more real, even abrasively real. And then the color purple or violet or lilac, all of those variants do appear as a sort of motif all the way through the story in various ways. So Thomas Haller, the famous painter in the story, this very strange, enigmatic individual at the beginning has created this brand new suite of paintings, all of them a different shade of violet.
Yeah. And there's a connection between Thomas Haller and Rothko.
Well, there is, in a way. People talk about him in the story as the heir to Rothko. He's seen as this kind of titanic abstract painter working in the vein of an abstract expressionist painter like Mark Rothko.
Right.
But actually, funnily enough, in the story, this reputation has become a sort of prison for Thomas. He feels completely trapped by this image that people have created for him, that the art world has created for him. And in fact, this is one of the big questions in the story. What does it mean to become hugely successful and then to feel alienated from your old self? by your success, because this is the situation that Thomas Haller finds himself in. And it's partly why he's run away to live in isolation in Switzerland. On the eve of this great big comeback show in London at the beginning of the story, he feels like a fraud. He feels like his whole life, in fact, is a lie.
Mm. And are you quite disciplined with your writing? Do you have certain times of the day that you set aside for writing?
I try to be fairly disciplined. Fiction writing is not the only kind of writing I do. A lot of my day-to-day work is nonfiction and reviewing and journalism and that kind of thing. And that obviously is dictated by deadlines, which is a nightmare, but also a fairly useful thing in terms of actually getting stuff done. So when it comes to writing fiction, I try and be equally disciplined, although it is harder because it's a different sort of writing, and the pace can't be consistent, not with the kind of writing I do anyway. So I don't set myself a word limit or anything. I think that would be hard to live up to, but I do try and spend a certain amount of time each day on it and at least get something down. But the results are very, very inconsistent depending on what kind of state I'm in, or it's very hard to know how successful a given day is going to be. You just have to press on with it, though.
Fair enough. And have you already started or thought about the next book?
Well, I have. In the meantime, I have a non-fiction book coming out later this year, which is called The Beverly Hills Housewife. And it's actually the story of a particular David Hockney painting of that title from the late 1960s, and particularly the woman in the painting and Los Angeles in those years. But I do have another fiction project up my sleeve. It's largely in my head, but it's making its way onto the page as well. So that's quite an exciting stage to be at.
Yeah, great. Well, in the meantime, listeners can get a copy of The Violet Hour from our website, tre.radio, and it's by James Cahill, who we've been chatting with. James, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you, Hannah.
You're listening to The Book Show with Hannah Murray on TRE.
Joining us on the line now is Katy Dixon. She studied history at Cambridge before returning to her home city of Liverpool to pursue a career in financial services, in which she's worked for 36 years. She's with us on the Book Show to talk about her debut novel, Enough. It's described as northern grit meets psychological suspense. It's a whatdunnit and whydunnit rather than a whodunnit. Welcome to the Book Show, Katy.
Hannah, it's lovely to be here. Thank you very much for having me.
Oh, it's a pleasure. Congratulations on your debut novel.
Thank you. Very exciting and scary, both at the same time.
Oh, yeah, I bet. I understand that you've kind of always wanted to be a writer, or always felt that you were a writer in a way.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's probably a lot of writers out there who'll relate to this. I started scribbling stories as long ago as I can remember, since I could hold a pen, I think. It was one of those things. I did it on and off for years, and I wrote some science fiction when I was a teenager. And then, as you know, life sort of gets in the way. You have to do things like jobs and whatnot. But yeah, I always dipped back into it. And here we are at a far advanced age from being a teenager, just published the first novel.
Yeah, so why now? How did it come about, this one?
Everyone will now hide their heads under their duvets when they hear this. It was partly COVID. So it was a story that I'd had kicking around for quite some time. Bits and pieces here and there had given me ideas. And then I started sort of writing a few chapters. I thought this was 2016. It's like, yeah, I'm going to do this. So I did, the odd bit here and there. But again, life's busy, career's busy. And then absolutely when we got to lockdown, glorious weather, did the garden and then ran out of things to do. And I thought, well, you know what? I'm going to get that book back out again. So I did a huge chunk in COVID. And then again, life just picked back up again. And then, it was a case of, right, I'm going to put my head down and I'm really going to do this and focus on it. So, it took a bit of time and effort, but I'd wanted to do it. And I think, again, I'm sure people will relate to this in writing or anything that they do. The closer you get towards the end goal, you think, right, okay, I can actually do this. So it was a combination, I hate to say it, of the pandemic allowing me to make progress, and then my brain just saying, right, doing it now.
And the idea for the initial story kind of came from your husband and a dream he had, is that right?
It did. It did, yes. Without giving too much of the novel away, because obviously I want everybody to read this and be completely hooked and have no idea what's going on until they get to the end. He woke up one day and he said, I had a dream that I'm a writer and you're not. It's like, oh, that's interesting. And then there were just various other things that happened. As I say, just little events that would happen. So, little things that crop up in day to day, something that happened in my office, a meeting that didn't go too well, a couple of snippets on the news, all around the same time. And the ideas started forming from there. And off we go. So, I have a lot to thank my husband for. He's a fabulous cook. And he also gave me the idea.
Fantastic. So tell us about your main characters.
Main characters, there are 3 characters that really the readers want to be aware of. So we have Emma Lucas, who is the heroine. And when we first meet her, we think, is she the heroine or is she not the heroine? So she's our heroine and she has a secret career. Spoiler alert, she may actually be a writer, but that does come out early doors. She's a writer, but she's keeping it secret and we're not quite sure why. So that's one of the whatdunnits that's unraveling. Then we have her ex-boyfriend called Dan Fox, and he's how we introduce the novel. He's having some strange phone calls, some strange newspaper stories sent to him through the post. People still do this. And this is how we introduce Dan, how we introduce Emma. So he's the boyfriend. And obviously it's one of those will they, won't they? He is trying to understand what her big secret is. Has that affected them? He's trying to help her. And then, of course, we have our superstar detective, or Greater Manchester Police Detective Sergeant in the person of Peter Tate, who comes into the investigation, is trying to help Emma, is trying to understand how to help her and how to unravel her mystery. And at the same time, he's got an old drugs case kicking around, which is causing him some grief. So they're the 3 main characters.
Okay. And what is he investigating? What's the crime? Can you tell us that?
The drugs is a side issue, as it were. But yeah, with Emma, he's trying to understand. He can tell that she's got a secret. But for Tate, the issue is very much, well, is what she's protecting, which is clearly something from her past, from her family past, what she's protecting, is this actually relevant to what's going on? So he's treading carefully, but at the same time, he has to be conscious of the fact that she could be in danger, Dan Fox could be in danger. So it's trying to draw out of her. So that's his conflict. How much do you pull out from her? How much do you step on her toes? And then, of course, as we progress through the novel, because it's a whodunit, and we're then getting to the whydunit. So clearly there is a what, but it's a why. Why did all this happen? And why is she keeping it secret? And Peter Tate's just trying to tease that out of her and put it into context for us. So as with a lot of narrative, Peter Tate is us. So he's the reader in a lot of ways, trying to understand what's going on and trying to piece it together.
Okay. So whereabouts is it set?
It's set primarily in Manchester. So although I'm a Liverpool lass, and I'm a huge fan of Liverpool, 2 reasons it's not in Liverpool. One is novel number 2 or 3 is in Liverpool. So I'm working on that at present. But also because Liverpool has a very vibrant business community, but Manchester really, when we come to business, is the Northern Powerhouse. So it made sense for it to be Manchester rather than Liverpool. So a lot of the action, Dan and obviously Peter is Greater Manchester Police. Dan and Emma both live in Manchester. Emma's best friend is in Manchester. So a lot of it is set around Manchester, some connection to Liverpool. And then we do actually bring in some Bristol and some Gloucestershire, which is a family connection that I have down Gloucestershire way. So again, we have some of that as we get a bit further on into the novel, but primarily it is northern.
Okay. And why did you plan all of this beforehand? Did you have a clear idea of the story, the structure, where you were going to take it?
That's a yes and a no. So I had an idea of this is what happens and this is how it unfolds. So there's the structure there. The 2 things that weren't clear as I'm writing it, and again, I'm sure a lot of writers will relate to this, is, as you know, you'll have the ups in the novel, so you'll have your peaks. So I wasn't quite sure on what the less impactful scenes were going to be. And the other element that came into play, there's 2 or 3 stories that actually run together. So obviously there's the past history, there's tapes of the mystery, and then there's what's going on now. Let's figure it out. So it was plotting those together. But I would actually say the big thing for me, I didn't know. I had an idea how I wanted it to end. And there is a twist at the end because, we've got to go through all these pages, better get some payoff. I didn't actually know the twist until I was probably, a good halfway through it, possibly 2/3. And then it came to me, which involved a bit of rewriting. So the answer is yes, structure was in place, but the actual scenes and the twists that pulled everything together and hopefully keep people involved, that came as I started writing it.
And being your first novel, have you learned a lot from the process of writing the book that you'll either make sure you do again or make sure you do differently?
Absolutely, massively. In my day job, as it were, I do a lot of project management. So I now have templates that I've managed to put together through doing this, which help me in constructing novels as we go through. I have a couple of fabulous beta readers, and they have given me an awful lot of feedback. And I have to say, huge thank you to people who have read the book and given me reviews, because, again, that gives me a great deal of feedback. And so there are things, for example, someone had come back and said some of it felt a bit familiar. So, when I followed up on that, we understood what that was. So I've certainly learned a lot about planning. I've learned a lot about time management. I've learned a lot about not going down too many rabbit holes. I've learned a lot about how much beta readers can give me when I'm working through things. And then a huge thank you to my publisher, Troubadour, going through the actual process of copy editing and proofreading and then getting to the launch. I've learned a lot about that, about the industry, but very much as well of what authors and writers can do in advance of that and not being afraid of social media. I've never been huge on social media, becoming friends with that. So yes, I've learned a lot about how to write the novel, how to get feedback on the novel, and then how to get a novel out there.
And who or what are beta readers?
They are the poor people who clearly have nothing better to do in their lives. So when I'm writing, I will send the chapters over to them. So I have 2. One who is she's not in the publishing industry, but she is quite close to creative, and the other one who's just Joe Blogs. He's not called Joe, by the way. Who I'm just saying, right, you like reading, what do you think of this? So as I'm going along writing it, I've got my beta readers reading the chapters, and they're giving me the feedback. So, I'll get feedback saying, really, Katy, that's not going to happen in real life, is it? Or, I read that and I didn't know what it meant. What were you trying to say? So that's been invaluable.
Yeah, definitely. So have you already got thoughts for book 2?
Book 2 is in preparation, yes. It's structured out in my nice templates. I've got my nice templates. And I think going back to a question you asked just now, something else that I learned in writing enough is I find it very useful just to plot out dialogue in a scene. So what I'm doing at the minute is I'm writing the dialogue in the key scenes, because that helps me put everything together. And it also helps me challenge. I have an idea that this is the mystery and this is how it's going to unravel. And character A will be talking to character B, and character B will just say something that I'm not expecting character B to say that will make me stop and think, oh, it doesn't work, does it? Before I get it to my beta readers. So number 2 is in full-on preparation, part writing.
And is it a follow-on or a completely different story with new characters?
No, it's completely different. My link, I think all of my books, they will have sort of linked to each other. Peter Tate is getting a second outing, but not just yet. But all of my books will always have a slight reference to the previous books, be it a character or something that's happened. So that's my way of linking them. But no, this is a completely new cast of characters.
Okay, exciting. Well, in the meantime, if listeners want to get a copy of Enough, it's out now. It's available on our website, tre.radio, and it's by Katy Dixon, who we've been chatting with. Katy, thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks, Hannah. Been a real pleasure.
The Book Programme. Presented by Hannah Murray.
Talk Radio Europe.
Your voice in Spain.
The Book Show, presented by Hannah Murray.
Good afternoon. Welcome to the second part of today's book show. In the first hour, we were chatting with Garrett Curbow, James Cahill and Katy Dixon. In this hour, we're joined by Lauren C. Johnson, who holds a BS in journalism from Emerson College and an MFA in creative writing from American University. She's the co-host of Babylon Salon, one of the Bay Area's longest-running literary and performance series. Her debut novel, The West Facade, is about a cathedral statue that discovers what it means to be human, then faces an impossible choice. It's the statue of St. Genevieve on the Notre Dame Cathedral that comes to life in 1348 at the dawn of the bubonic plague. We're also chatting to Ian Saraja, whose first career was in banking, where he rose to senior positions in a major bank. His third novel, The Ghostwriter, is a dark mystery about books, writing and creation. It's an inventive novel with emotional depth about failure, forgiveness and the characters that we leave behind. And finally, on today's book show is Nicole Liang, who has lived in 4 countries across 3 continents. Born and bred in Singapore, she completed her BA at Cornell, served a stint as a trader in Hong Kong, and earned her MBA from London Business School. Her multicultural background and diverse life experience have led her to her debut novel, The Deflector, the first book in the Gifted trilogy. Each book will be focused in turn on the 3 virtues of compassion, wisdom, and courage. And that is today's book show on Talk Radio Europe.
The Book Show, presented by Hannah Murray.
Joining us on the line now is Lauren C. Johnson. She holds a BS in journalism from Emerson College and an MFA in creative writing from American University. She's the co-host of Babylon Salon, one of the Bay Area's longest-running literary and performance series. She's with us on the book show to talk about her debut novel, The West Facade. It's where a cathedral statue discovers what it means to be human, then faces an impossible choice. It's the statue of St. Genevieve that comes to life in 1348 at the dawn of the bubonic plague. Welcome to the book show, Lauren.
Hi, thank you so much for having me.
It's a pleasure. Great to have you with us. And congratulations on your debut novel.
Thank you so much.
It must be very exciting.
Yes, it is. I have been working on this. It's been many years in the making, so it's kind of hard to believe that it's about to be out in the world.
And it's a fascinating idea for a story. Where did this all come from?
Oh, wow. So I would say that a couple of different places. I've always sort of had this fascination with statues ever since I was little. And I think it's because, in a way, in addition to being really beautiful, I think statues, because they're so, especially ones I'm thinking from the classical era, are so lifelike that they can be kind of uncanny. And so there's something a little scary about that beauty of sculpture with how lifelike they are. So I think I've always been drawn to statues and have been very fascinated with them. When I was in college, I had the great privilege of being able to do a study abroad program in the Netherlands. And part of that included a trip to Paris, where our class was able to tour the Notre Dame Cathedral. And what really stood out to me, in addition to just, I think everyone who sees a Notre Dame, especially for the first time and gets to spend time in it, it's just a striking cathedral. But what really stood out to me, especially years after seeing it, were the statuary. And I love the gargoyles. The gargoyles are so magical. But it was the statues that line the doorways on the west facade of the cathedral, those 3 main entrances. There seems to be this metropolis of statues when you're facing the cathedral, when you're walking inside one of those doors, and they're just the way they are placed in the doorway, looking down at you from the arches or the alcoves. that really captured my imagination. I just thought, what could they be? If they were alive, what could they be thinking about? What could they want? What could they desire? And I think it's also because I found them to be imposing as well. There's something as well where, going back to that kind of feeling about statues being kind of uncanny and a little scary because they can be so lifelike. I just wanted to explore that. And I wanted to I think I just really wanted to kind of humanize them and get in their heads. And so I started just playing around with the idea of a story that took place on the Notre Dame Cathedral with one of the cathedral statues. And I really didn't know what to do with it. I was like, this is kind of campy. It's kind of weird. And I wasn't quite sure what to do with it. So I just kind of kept it in a drawer. And then it wasn't until years later when I began an MFA program in creative writing and decided I wanted to have writing be a part of my life in a serious way that I built my structure. I structured into my life and started exploring stories. And I just couldn't forget this idea I had about the Notre Dame Cathedral and the statues there. And I decided I wanted to pursue it. And I just was obsessed with it. I realized I probably wouldn't be able to write anything else until I saw this idea through.
So tell me why you decided to focus on the statue of St. Genevieve and bring her to life.
That's a really great question. I was playing around with different protagonists when I first began. In the earliest drafts, it was actually St. Anne's story. And it really, as I learned more about the statues in Notre Dame and Paris, and then also just the role of the different saints in Catholicism. I'm not Catholic or religious, so I really had to really do my homework and my research into understanding who the role of these characters. And I realized that, Saint Genevieve is the patron saint of Paris. And that just felt so appropriate to choose her as the main character and to tell her story. And also just when I look at photos of the Notre Dame Cathedral or the times when I visited myself, because I did visit Paris a couple of times as research. I don't know. I was just drawn to her. I think she looked approachable to me. So it was that history and also just being drawn to the sculpture itself.
Yeah. And also the setting, 1348. Was it difficult to do a lot of research as to what was happening in Paris then?
Absolutely. It was in the beginning. At first I tried to set the story in the Renaissance, right on the edge of the Renaissance. And one of the things in an early version that the statues were, one of the conflicts was that some of them were protesting the changes in society they saw at the dawn of the Renaissance and what their role would be. And I realized I just wasn't finding enough tension in that conflict at the time. It felt slow. So that sort of time period wasn't quite working. And then I made this decision before the COVID pandemic, but I read something about the bubonic plague and thought, well, why don't I just set my story then? And part of it had to do with that in that time, it had to fit into the world building of the story. So when the statues come to life on the new moon, when Paris is completely dark, I don't think the city was ever dark. People would have candles and lanterns burning at all hours, but I had to make it think, okay, when is this going to be as dark as possible so that readers can somewhat suspend their disbelief a little bit more that the statues are moving without being seen. So I wanted to set it as early as possible. And then, just thinking about, well, if I have it set during the bubonic plague, that's really going to raise the stakes. not just for the people, but for the statues as well. So I decided to set it then. And at first, I was just going and reading as many books as I could possibly find about medieval Paris, about that time period, watching documentaries about the bubonic plague. And the more I got into it, the more I found that there were so many incredible historical resources. Big shout out to medievalist.net. If anyone is writing anything historically set in the Middle Ages, definitely recommend that website. And there are several medievalists that write articles regularly, and I became a regular reader of that site and listening to medieval podcasts as well. So there's just a great wealth of resources out there that I found. The more that I read, the more I found.
Yeah. And it must have been so weird suddenly finding yourself in the middle of a pandemic and getting some kind of idea as to what it must have been like for people.
Yeah, it was. I think, I was right before, so I would say it was at the very end of 2019. I felt pretty good about my draft of the first part of the book. And then, and this is, not to give away too many details, it's included in the book synopsis that St. Genevieve becomes human. So it's in that second half where she is human. And that I really wrote most of that, especially drafting those scenes during Shelter in Place. I live in San Francisco and spent 2020 sheltering in place in my apartment building in a densely populated apartment building in a very dense neighborhood in a city and where everyone was very anxious. And I channeled a lot of my anxieties, I think, especially into writing those chapters. I was working, I feel very privileged. I was able to work from home. So I would have my work computer on, I'd work, and then I'd put that away and switch to my personal computer and start drafting after the work day. And I feel like I really channeled a lot of what it was, just a sense of anxiety about what was going on into those pages. And I've realized as I've talked to more people about my book, I think under the scaffolding of Paris, you might find, I think I really did channel a bit of San Francisco as well, because I kind of had that, I was imagining, well, I'll never be able to know what it was like in medieval Paris during the bubonic plague, but I can channel my emotional experience of living in San Francisco during COVID-19. And I think that went into those pages.
Yeah. And something else that happens in the book, Genevieve needs to decide whether she wants to remain as a statue or remain human. And that's a really interesting kind of part of the book. And even though we don't have that decision in terms of being a statue, you said that it is something that does happen with all of us. The idea of embracing our short lives. How do we feel about our own mortality? It's quite an interesting comparison.
Absolutely. That question really rose it really came to the surface as I wrote. And I think it came through at the time that I was writing this. My dad was going through cancer treatments, and unfortunately he passed away in 2024. So it was right after I signed the contract with Santa Fe Writers Project. So he did get to know that my book would be out in the world, which I'll always be grateful for. But I think at the time, especially that this question was surfacing for me, a lot of my feelings about what do we like, our lives are so fragile, and they're infuriating. Life is long, but it's also infuriatingly short too. So how do we reconcile that, and how do we face that? And it's I think it's something a lot of us, we go through the day and try not to think about too hard. I know. And especially when I was younger, it was something I never thought about. But going through that, it just was, and especially the COVID-19 pandemic, just this realization of like, wow, like our lives are, how do we live and we accumulate these things and these experiences and build these whole worlds, and then and then it's over.
Yeah, I totally agree. I only started asking the same questions after losing my mum. I think losing a parent or someone really close to you really makes you question these things, I think, for the first time, because it's really easy to think that it's something that happens to other people, death, even though we all know it's happening to us all. Until you lose someone personally, you can't really understand or appreciate what it's like. And suddenly it's like, whoa, they're not here anymore. It's huge.
Yeah, thank you so much for saying that. And I'm so sorry you lost your mom too. Yeah, it's absolutely, definitely agree with everything you just said. And still, if I had to kind of sum the big theme up, I would say that I think Genevieve and myself really believe that, we have to make the most. I mean, everybody says this, but I think it's true that life can be really beautiful, and while we're here, we should enjoy that and all of our including all the difficult and hard emotions that come with that.
Yeah. It makes you realize how important and sacred life is, and do what you want to do with who you want to do it with, and all this kind of thing.
Absolutely. And that even when it's a difficult time, that isn't it beautiful that we get to feel something?
Yeah, for sure. And one more thing I wanted to ask you about, the role of a piece of citrus in your book and the kind of connection to your family and your history.
Absolutely. Thank you for asking that. So, yeah, this again came through when I was drafting. I remember I was, I would have these early morning writing sessions before work, and I was really struggling with just what do I do with this first chapter? Initially the story opened with the statues and people seeing a comet that was an ominous omen. And it wasn't working. Again, it was one of those where it's like, this is like the tension isn't quite there. And I was up at about this time, Pacific time, which was around 5:45 writing. And it was one of those ideas that come to you early in the morning. Like, what if somebody places a fruit in her hand, and in the hand of Saint Genevieve, the statue. And then I thought, what if it's a citrus? And it was just an idea that came to me. And then I thought, well, how would it be a citrus? But then I read more about the role of citruses during the Middle Ages. And it's very probable that it could have happened where somebody did place one in her hands, and it was through trading, and there was a big merchant network, and citrus was in fact being traded at the time. It would have come from Spain most likely, and it wouldn't have been like the kind of citrus we know of today. It would have probably been way more bitter, and so because our current the citruses we have now have been engineered and crossbred. But so I thought, okay, well, if that could have actually happened, then sure, why not? And it is a way to kind of pay that homage to my home state. I grew up in Florida, and that family history. My grandfather was a citrus engineer, and did that kind of crossbreeding of citrus, and in Florida in the mid-century. So I did grow up with my grandfather always coming over and just bringing these bags of all these different fruit that he had crossbred and grew on trees outside his house, like tangelos and I think a tangerine and a grapefruit, or like all kinds of different oranges that I can't remember the names of now. So that was a big part of my childhood, and I really do think in a lot of ways Florida has a way of creeping back into everything I write, and so this was a way of bringing a little bit of Florida into medieval Paris.
Yeah, nice. I think there's a book in that, what your grandfather did for a living, a citrus engineer. That sounds really interesting.
It really is. I appreciate more of this history the older I get, the more I appreciate this history. And That's a good point. I would say the next thing that I'm going to be working on is I have this collection of stories and the works that take place in Florida. So I will be absolutely, after the whirlwind of the West Facade, I will be returning back to my home state and writing some stories that take place there.
Nice. Yeah, it's funny, isn't it? Because when it's our childhood, it's just normal. It's just what we went through. But it's only as we get older we realise, not everybody had a grandfather who was a citrus engineer, and suddenly we realise that it's quite fascinating.
It really is. Yeah, I was talking about that with my husband, that and he grew up in Orange County, California, but so there was like a lot of citrus lore there too. But I was telling him, I'm like, yeah, we just had just bowls and bowls of oranges around, and he's like, that was not part of my childhood.
No, exactly. Brilliant. Well, in the meantime, if listeners want to get a copy of The West Facade, it's available on our website, tre.radio, and it's by Lauren C. Johnson, who we've been chatting with today. Lauren, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me and for your wonderful questions. I loved talking to you.
The Book Show with Hannah Murray.
Joining us on the line now is Ian Saraja, whose first career was in banking, where he rose to senior positions in a major bank, completing an MBA and a degree in psychology along the way. His second career was to set up a scientific analytical business, which he sold in 2015. I think he's on his fourth career now as a writer, and he's with us on the Book Show to talk about his third novel, The Ghost Writer. It's after The Boy Behind the Glass Screen and The Three Wives of Charlie Mellon. It's a dark mystery about books, writing and creation, an inventive novel with emotional depth about failure, forgiveness and the characters that we leave behind. Welcome to the Book Show, Ian.
Hi, thank you very much, and thank you for the introduction.
Oh, it's great to have you with us. So when did you decide to become a writer? How did that happen?
Do you know, I sort of fell into it. For ages, I did very quietly, without anybody watching, would scribble ideas for stories and slowly built up to it. But I didn't tell anybody, because when you work for a bank or you work in the science industry, that didn't seem quite right to write fiction. And then I was on a holiday and I started to describe a story to someone, and I was just chatting away, saying I got a bit lost into it as maybe I'd had a bit to drink. And then I realised there was about 8 people all sitting around, leaning in, listening for what the next part of the story was. And that's when I really got hooked and committed myself to working at completing various of the novels I'm working on.
Yeah. And did you have a clear idea from the start of the kind of books you wanted to write, the kind of genre?
Oh, I wish I had, and I still don't. In fact, that first story, which is a big fantasy one, is still languishing somewhere on one of my files, and I know I should go back to it. But I tend to get, I'm going to say sidetracked. I get an idea or a thought or a question, and I just like to follow that to see where it'll take me. And quite a few times it's taken me down to a story that I like writing. A couple of times it's turned out to be a dead end, and those are still hidden away somewhere, and probably I won't go back to them. And one is a complete maze, which I really think is a great story, but I just can't get it to read correctly. Mm-hmm. So no genre.
Okay, so tell us about The Ghost Writer.
So The Ghost Writer, that came from a simple question that came to mind with regard to the nature of ghosts, which I won't talk about that question because it's sort of one of the reveals within the story. But as I followed it through, I liked the idea that maybe there were ghosts of stories as well, mainly as small characters who had been forgotten as the authors focused on the main characters. And one of the small characters in The Ghost Writer is probably one of the most famous characters in literature, and he doesn't even have a name, which is amazing when you think about it. But if I say it's the boy who got the turkey for Scrooge in Christmas Carol, everybody knows that, but he doesn't have a name. And I thought, if I was that character, I would be so annoyed. I'm given a crucial part in the redemption of Scrooge, and I'm not even given a name. So I started to follow that idea through, and really that's part of the ghost story within this. It's what happens to these characters who we all know and lots of people discuss as though they really exist. And that sort of took me into, well, what is existence in that respect? If enough people believe in Jane Eyre or in any of the other characters, surely they have some reality more than just being on a piece of paper or on a film or in a play or in music. And I like that idea. But then you have to make a story as well. It's no good just having a theme. So then I built a story around that, and I thought about how people would talk to ghosts and what's the process and what do we use in the modern world, if you like, for talking to ghosts, and what does that mean? So having got the theme and the idea, I still then needed to make it into something which I felt could make a good story for anybody to read and enjoy.
Yeah. So tell us about your main characters then that you're using.
So I guess one of my favourite characters, who actually I've had a few reviews that say they don't like him, is Richie Richards. Richie is a young medium for the millennials, he is what he calls the Google ghost listener, and he has discovered a way to tap into, he says, the echoes of the Big Bang, where he thinks that all spirits go after they die, and we're energy, and we go into it and we come back out again. And he's found a way to tap into that. And he talks to people whilst he sits within a metal cage, which keeps him away from any other outside interferences. And he taps away on his computer and he asks questions, and then he picks up people in the audience to talk to. And Richie's a young man looking forward to making a career. He really drives that side of the story and keeps things evolving. And then behind that, we have Edgar, who is a failed writer and a librarian, and he is haunted by the books that he has written in the past, which some were educational and they did a little bit of success, but most of his manuscripts just sort of sit on his table now, or on his shelves, and they haunt him and mock him for his failure to become a big success. And he's looking to see whether he can have one last opportunity for success. And he's the one who starts talking to the ghosts of different books, because he's so imbued with books and with the idea of them, and from living with them in the libraries where he's always worked, that he has a special connection with them. So he starts to talk to them, and he starts to write their stories. So he writes the story of, I've decided, Thaddeus, who is the young boy from the Charles Dickens story. But then he starts to worry as to quite why he has been selected for this. Why has he been pulled out of the millions of people who might have been selected? And that's where the story starts to shift a bit as he explores his own past to try to understand where it might go.
So how does the story develop? How would you, without giving too much away, how would you describe what happens in the book?
So it all starts off nicely, as you'd expect, with him getting to know a couple of the characters and starting to write the stories. And that's fine. And he can look forward and he can write the story of Thaddeus and his wonderful life. But then he comes across Father Ferapont. And Father Ferapont is from the brothers Karamazov. And he is 75 years old in the story. And for want of a better phrase, I describe him as a mad monk. He is certainly a very evil and strange person. And he requests that Edgar write his story of a time when he was not as he is today, not afflicted in the way he is, a time when he was sane and enjoying life. Now, that's the difference, because in all the other stories, Edgar's been asked to write forward from the time of point that he meets the character. Now he's got to try to write backwards. And he realizes that it's actually impossible, because the writing is so good. He's got to end up at the point where the story picks him up, but somehow he's got to work a way back along that path. And no matter how he tries, he finds he keeps failing. And slowly he's pulled into the world, which is a very constrained and dark world of Father Ferapont, and he becomes trapped there. And this is where he and Richie Richards begin to intertwine and their worlds begin to join together, and he finds possibly a way out. And between the two of those, there is Myra, who's a publisher, and she's the one taking on both Richie Richards' story as his early biography and the stories of Edgar, the short stories that he's writing. And there's a bit of a love story around Myra, and there's the challenge of what it's like to try to produce books and how do you find your marketplace within the industry, and the challenges of getting books published as well. So she acts as a fulcrum between the two of them.
And how does this book compare to the other two that you've written?
Very different. The Three Wives of Charlie Mellon, for him, I wanted to start with a character, and it really is just a character study. So I'd actually written about him in a previous book, which hasn't been published. But Charlie is a self-made man who really didn't get his plans drawn up very well to begin with. But he's got a heart of gold and a wife he absolutely adores. And Charlie keeps getting into different challenges and different problems, but it's very much a comedy and a character story, whereas The Ghostwriter is a ghost story, and it does have elements. I had one reader, actually my sister-in-law, who refused to read any of the Father Ferapont bits because she said he was too nasty and she didn't want to see him. And the Boy Behind the Glass Screen is very much a speculative work, and it's very topical at the moment as it involves an AI. Before AI became quite such a big storyline as it is now, and it envisaged a certain type of AI and asked questions as to how you would, a different way of training an AI and what that would actually mean and what the implications would be as it developed. But that's very much on the edge of science fiction, although I don't worry too much about it's not hard science fiction in terms of exactly how that process would work, but it's got enough speculative level in it to try to make it possible, but also looks more at the implications that would flow from the storyline that I developed.
So do you like testing yourself to try and make each book very different? Is that part of the aim?
It's not the aim, but I think because I've written about 5 or 6 books now, I say not all of them are published, but what I've found is that I learn a lot by trying different approaches, and I'm just starting a new one. So what I've finished recently is about the fall of the Soviet Union, and initially it focuses on the fall of the Berlin Wall, but it's very much structured around actual historical events. So the story itself was plotted by what happened in reality. The one I'm just starting, I had an idea that I quite liked, and I came up with some characters who I spent quite a lot of time just thinking about. And I'm taking them to a certain point in the story, which is probably only 15% of the way in. But thereafter, I'm going to do what people call pantsing. I'm just going to let it flow and develop. So go back to the wall, very structured, very controlled, linked to precise dates in the real world. This one, take it up to a point and then just see what the characters do. And I'm already been quite excited by some of the things that have happened, even in the first couple of chapters, by going down that approach. So I guess in answer to your question, I like exploring different ways to do things, to try to find out ways I enjoy, but also what might be better ways, and to improve the craft of writing.
Yeah, that's a great idea. Well, if people want to get a copy of The Ghostwriter, it's out now. It's available on our website, tre.radio, and it's by Ian Saraja, who we've been chatting with today. Ian, thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks very much for your time. Much appreciated.
You are listening to Hannah Murray on The Book Show.
Joining us on the line now is Nicole Liang, who has lived in 4 countries across 3 continents. Born and bred in Singapore, she completed her BA at Cornell in upstate New York, served a stint as a trader in Hong Kong, and earned her MBA from London Business School. Her multicultural background, diverse life experience, and penchant for romantic fantasy have led to the birth of The Deflector, her debut novel, and the first book of the Gifted trilogy. Each one focuses in turn on the 3 virtues of compassion, wisdom, and courage. Welcome to the book show, Nicole.
Hannah, thanks for having me.
Oh, it's a pleasure. Great to have you. And congratulations on your debut novel.
Thank you. It has been a journey, so I'm glad that it's finally out.
Oh, yes, I bet. And I understand the writing of these books, particularly the first one, started from a really tough and tragic time in your life.
That's right. So growing up, I've always been really intrigued by fantasy and storytelling, and knew that one day I would want to tell a story, build a world, a complex magical world with multifaceted and layered characters. And the first 2 characters kind of materialized in my mind in 2017 by my mom's deathbed. Back at that point, I really wished that there were gifts such as like easing pain, healing wounds, and basically transferring life itself. The 2 main characters are Akari and her mom, Mari. So they kind of materialized in my mind with gifts of deflecting wounds as well as healing wounds. And that kind of, I sort of built the rest of the world around there, the world of the gifted around them. And that's how my story sort of came into this world, I guess.
Yeah. And did it help a bit with the grief, with the writing?
I think there were definitely emotions that I felt that I've channeled into the characters, as well as observations and introspections that I've sort of put into different characters as well. So yeah, I think in a way I was able to express my feelings, and it was also a cathartic and healing process.
Yeah. So tell us about the world you've created.
Okay, so The Deflector, you said, it's the first book in the Gifted trilogy, and it's a young adult high fantasy novel about people with gifts. So the story opens with 6-year-old Akari and her mother, Mari, being chased from the capital by the main villain, Zatari, and his harvesters. So Zatari is the most dangerous and powerful gifted in the kingdom, with the ability to harvest the gift of others. So at this time, he's after Mari's power of healing. During their encounter, Akari experiences the premature first sighting of her own gift, which is the ability to deflect wounds. And when Zatari tries to harvest Mari, she inevitably destroys the very island they're on, including him and his harvesters. Also, that's what most people think. And fast forward 10 years, the now 16-year-old Akari, who has since been raised single-handedly by Mari in the outskirts, befriends a boy from the capital, Young, who is another main lead in the books, and she finds herself uncovering her buried past and identity. You have to read The Deflector to find out what happens next, I guess.
So can you tell us more about the world itself, the kingdom that you've created?
Okay, so the Kingdom of Xylon is sort of built upon the 3 greats, which is the Great Harvest, the Great Divide, and the Great Rebellion. So 10 years ago, King Alvaro, he gave up the Register of the Gifted, which is an official record of all the Gifted in the kingdom, to Zatari in order to keep his throne. And because of that, a lot of the gifted in the kingdoms were persecuted. But because the outskirts were had less like military protection than the capital, they bore the brunt of the Great Harvest. So that was the Great Harvest. And then after Mari destroyed the island where Zatari and the harvesters were on, and including them, so that's what most people think, that sort of ended the Great Harvest. And because the outskirts had to bear the brunt of most of the harvestings, they rebelled against the capital, and that led to the capital. But the rebellion was quelled by the capital. So after the Great Rebellion, they built the Great Divide in order to keep the outskirts away to prevent any further uprisings. That is sort of the basis of the story. And since then, no one has been able to pass through the Great Divide, and the outskirts and the capital are pretty much separate. 10 years after the 3 greats, Akari meets a boy who appears, a boy from the capital, Young, who appears in the outskirts. And that's how I guess the main story starts from there.
Okay. And can you tell us a bit more about the characters?
Okay, so Akari is the main character. In the main story, she's 16 years old. She has been brought up single-handedly by her mother, Mari, for the last 10 years. She knows that she has from the capital, but she doesn't have much memories of it. Her best friend, who grew up with her in the outskirts, is Thai, and the both of them are part of the People's Protector, who supported the Great Rebellion. And they're sort of enemies with the capital now, because there are definitely tensions going on after the Three Greats. And when Yong and his assistant Admiral appear from the capital in the outskirts, there are tensions between them because they're sort of on two opposing sides, and but their interactions, after some sort of interactions, there are questions as to whether they are really on different sides or whether they are against a common enemy.
And as I mentioned in the introduction, each one of the books in the trilogy focus on one of the three virtues: compassion, wisdom, and courage. So how does compassion come into this book?
Okay, so there are three royal regalia, which basically gives someone the legitimacy to the throne in this kingdom. 10 years ago, they have gone missing. In the first book, which is The Deflector, it's focused on the Jewel of Compassion, which Akari at some point finds out is not actually missing, but it's hidden beneath the floorboard in her home. And she starts to wonder what sort of ties she might have to the capital, why she or her mother have been in possession of this of the Jewel of Compassion, which her mom had told her had gone missing. This has actually been her gift from her father 10 years ago when she was 6, when she just turned 6. But after the Three Greats, her mom had told her that it was missing, but it turns out that it isn't. So story, I guess, through the Jewel of Compassion, she sort of finds her link back to the capital and discover what sort of buried past and identity, and figures out her buried past and identity, I guess. Later on, Akari has to go on to reunite the three royal regalia as well as their wielders. So in the next two books, it would be focused on the Mirror of Wisdom as well as the Sword of Courage. And this sort of ties the three royal regalia together. So the trilogy is sort of the reunification of the three royal regalia as well as the wielders.
Okay. And before you wrote book one, was it a plan from the start that it was going to be a trilogy and they were going to be connected like this?
Yes, I knew from the start as I was planning the big picture story or like the narrative arc of the entire trilogy that it was going, each royal regalia would sort of, each book was centered around each one of the royal regalia and centered around Akari finding the three like sacred objects and reuniting them. So yeah, it was the plan from the start for sure.
Yeah. Okay. Well, if people want to get a copy of The Deflector, part 1 of the Gifted trilogy, it's by Nicole Liang, who we've been chatting with today. And the book is available on our website, tre.radio.
Thank you, sir.
Nicole, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you so much, Hannah. Thanks for having me.
The Book Programme. Presented by Hannah Murray.
The Book Show on TRE is sponsored by CK La Quinta, a residency care home for the elderly like no other in Marbella. Find out more at cklaquinta.com.
You've been listening to a TRE production. If you've enjoyed this program, there'll be another episode waiting for you next week, right here on this platform, where you can also access our extensive back catalogue of shows and interviews. For more information on our live programming, social media channels, and apps, and how to contact Talk Radio Europe, please visit tre.radio.